Cohola zebra mussel committee member, where we are in fact zebra mussel free, and within a 10-mile radius, 360 degrees around us, we are completely contaminated with zebra mussels. But yet we continue to maintain clear waters. So on the next page is the list of the 21 contaminated large areas of zebra mussels, and from Ken's opinion, we in Kansas just don't get it. We continue to contaminate more lakes. It's simply that prevention comes from clean, drain, and dry, and that goes into any body of water. That prevention is for any body of water that's contaminated. If you transport that, as you know, contaminates the next body of water. So clean, drain, and dry is the ideal step. On the next page, it shows you just the contamination that you're probably aware of the zebra mussels in Kansas, where it has gradually increased over the years, the number of lakes, rather, that are being contaminated. And then the next two pages just show where I had found the new rule, because I'm getting ready to train the zebra mussel inspectors at Lake Cohola again for the coming year, so I always go to your site. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, what's the logic in the bluegills and sunfish? So then I sent a note to you guys there that says, hey, I'd like some more insight why the law was changed. Didn't get a response yet. I realize emails are massive and your days are busy. And then I found out that you guys, in fact, were having the meeting here. I said, well, why don't I use this as an opportunity to come and talk to you? So then, where we're at right now is on the handout is the one with the little yellow tag on it. And I think that is the biggest piece of my information for you, where I understand the law says, or the new guideline says, hey, as long as the bluegills and sunfish are caught in non-designated contaminants, transport them from one body of water to another. As you see on the map that I've showed you there, that says the contaminated lake, which is designated as contaminated, and everybody follows the rules, we don't have to worry about another contaminated lake. But if you follow the logic on the other path that talks about if KDOT, you guys have not identified that lake as contaminated, because you do it once a year, twice a year, the checks. If you haven't checked it for contamination and it is in fact contaminated, and somebody takes a bluegill or sunfish out of that water, moves it to the next lake, and now that's that cycle contamination that continues. And that's where my concern is, that the logic of bluegills and sunfish really doesn't make a lot of sense, because it simply is not the bluegills and sunfish, it's the water. So then on the next slide, I just want to recap for you guys that pieces of information from states around us that look at this in terms of water. The agency in Wisconsin, Department of Wildlife, says that you may not use on other waters only if no lake or water were added to that container. Missouri says, when moving from one body of water to another, make sure it's clean, drain, dry, or dispose. Nebraska says it's illegal to release bait fish or any fish caught from a different body of water into public waters. Oklahoma says drains to bilge pump live wells and bait buckets before leaving. The reason I put Council Grove in there back in 2006, they says, hey guys, El Dorado is contaminated. Their strategy for prevention was make sure if you're in El Dorado Lake, your boots, minnow buckets, tools, and anything that has touched the waters of El Dorado Lake should be washed in hot water. That was their strategy. They didn't apply it. They are now contaminated. Now, can't tell you that it came from El Dorado. All I can tell you is they were logic enough to say the water is what's causing the contamination. And then in 2012, you guys had said, hey, the best thing for us to do for prevention is you must use bait fish taken on department lands and waters only where taken. Great idea. Then we're to where we are today, that the exception is allowing bluegills and sunfish to be moved from bodies of water inside Kansas. So just a little bit of how we're preventing zebra mussels on the next slide at Lake Cohola is because of this new law, we have folks obviously that come in there and fish, and they'll follow the rules of Kansas, so we'll have to put a association rule there advising them that, say, if you're bringing fish into Lake Cohola from outside Lake Cohola, and Lake Cohola is the association, we're completely surrounded and own the entire land around Lake Cohola, we'll have to advise those folks not to bring in fish, request that don't bring in fish from other bodies of water. Because what happens is they follow the state law, and we're going to ask them not to do that. Don't bring any bluegills and sunfish in from any other lakes in Kansas. So then my request to the commission is help prevent future waters of Kansas from being contaminated with zebra mussels. Specifically, don't allow any type fish to be transported from the waters or lakes and or rivers to another water or lake or river waters, as it will not which is now allowed by, bluegills and sunfish. So I want to thank you for your time, your consideration, my request to help prevent future contamination of Kansas waters. And you'll see my pen and ink change on that last slide there, so I'm sorry about that. But thank you for your time. Yes, sir.
You're saying then that the water on the fish will, the water in the bucket or the water that is on the fish will contaminate the new water?
There is positive evidence now that the microscopic veligers, the zebra mussel eggs, will live up to 24 days out in water that's being transported. And because they're microscopic, they can get there. Now that ranges from a day to 24 days.
But this is
based upon a
this
temperature.
Is the water that the fish are swimming in the minnow bucket or bait bucket.
Correct. Okay. So if there is a drop of water on that fish, or it's inside the fish, it certainly could be transported because the egg is inside. There's no scientific studies that have proven yet that going through the fish that the eggs will stay alive. The zebra mussels themselves will if there's enough of them eaten. But yes, most of the concern would be you're transporting the water. That's the only way to take bluegills and sunfish. You're transporting the water from here to here with your bluegills and sunfish.
Doug, do we know this?
The real issue here is that when we allowed bluegill and green sunfish, we did it largely because of the private water impoundment ruling that we have no authority to stop somebody from moving fish or water from 80,000 privately owned lakes across the state. So that was the reason. We have no authority to stop that movement, and so what we were doing is we had 80,000 lakes that we don't even check for zebra mussels that fish could already be moved in under the old rule. And the new rule, what we've done is allowed movement from public waters as well, as long as it's not on our designated A&S list. So the veligers certainly can be transferred by moving water from point A to point B. There's no doubt about that. The question is, what's the right thing to do in light of the fact that there was 80,000 waters that were already legally allowed, people could move the water and the fish without any regulation that we can invoke. We were just unnecessarily hampering anglers, and so the idea was adding the ability to move water and fish from undesignated aquatic nuisance species waters wasn't a big additional risk to what we were already having to accept.
Is that we don't have a boat go on any other water, that we never have anything that touches one lake go to another, and it just sometimes it's not completely practical. And I think that a lot of zebra mussels, we know that veligers can be transported in water in the right parameters. I think that we don't know how much contamination has come from water and how much has actually come from mussels on the boats either, do we?
No, and there's other vectors as well, such as heavy equipment working in a stream that might be infested. We don't. There could be a water truck in there from an oil field thing, and water can be transported a lot of different ways, not just by boats and anglers. So basically, what we've tried to do is educate and regulate what we have authority to regulate, and educate those that we can't regulate to try to make sure that they are aware of the risk when they're operating, whether it's equipment, whether it's people moving water for livestock, that kind of thing. We've done everything we can to try to educate the public on the dangers of moving water from point A to point B.
Well, the only reason I'm asking this, Doug, is because I know this has been a contentious subject and difficult for all of us to get our arms around, but let me give you even a simpler, I think, to maybe ask the same thing Gerald did, maybe to where I can understand it a little easier, is let's say a guy puts his boat in a lake that's contaminated, and he pulls his plug and he drains it in the lake, but there's a gallon of water that stays in the bottom of the hole. And he goes to the next lake and he puts his boat in, he forgets to put his plug in. That gallon of water goes in that lake. Did zebra mussels get transferred from that boat? If there were zebra mussels there,
It's possible.
they would.
Absolutely.
So, like Gerald says, it's almost impossible to control it.
Yeah, and if you, in the heat of the summer, if you have your boat out of the water for 5 days or so, then you could probably assume that you're probably not going to be, but in cooler weather, it might take more, like he mentioned. And the other option is using bleach or hot water and spraying the equipment off and that kind of thing. So there are ways to safely move from point A to point B, but there's always some risk involved.
If I may share a point with you. You talk about, I belong to an organization across the western United States from Mississippi to California, and that organization is trying to prevent the spread across the western United States. Idaho, if you bring a boat across the state line to Idaho now, you're stopped and it's inspected to make sure it is clean, drained, and dry. And yes, even in the bilge it's there. The zebra mussel will live for 30 days out of water in cold weather as long as it's not freezing. And in about, I'd have to pull out my little chart, but in the summertime is the best time. The hotter it is, the better off we are. If it's in Kansas, 100 degrees, that zebra mussel that's not in the water is likely to die within, I think it's 24 hours or 48 hours. So hot weather will kill them when they're out of the water. The biggest chance we have is just transporting that. That's why you guys in your guidance have said needs to be clean, drained, and dry. Live wells need to be dry. Otherwise, as soon as you open them up, you're dead in the water again. The folks at Lake Cahola are not happy with our process, which is you cannot put a boat on Lake Cahola unless it has been inspected, and if it has not a Lake Cahola seal on it, then it must go in quarantine for that amount of time that will kill that particular, based upon the temperature, zebra mussel or quagga mussel, whichever one it may be. In addition to that, we put a red seal between the boat and the trailer, and they can haul it wherever they want, but when that boat comes back to launch, it better have that red seal on or it starts all over. That sealing process is used at some other states as well. This commission that's trying to get all the states together to do that, to prevent the spread, is out there working with these kind of pieces, but I thought this might be an opportunity to address to you guys that says we can stop the spread. It's possible, and I've proven it at Lake Cahola. It's uncomfortable when people have the right education. They don't want to spread and contaminate other lakes. The reason they don't is because over here on the other side, it's going to cost a fortune in treating that water just for the cost. Council Grove Lake was shut down completely when they got contaminated with zebra mussels because they extracted their water for their firefighting equipment from the pump, and the pump was clogged. So the entire city was impacted because of zebra mussels. So this is not just a fishing thing, even though that's what the bluegill and sunfish is. It's fishing, and us fishermen are blamed for transporting it, but it's not just the fishermen. So it's a significant issue.
Ken, you've done a great job of explaining. I mean, I've learned a lot from what you said, and Doug, I mean, we've all learned a lot through this. We're going to probably deal with this again as a commission, and probably future commissions are obviously going to deal with it. Would you guys be opposed to talking to each other and maybe sharing ideas?
Certainly, I work with Jason right now. Jason and I are linked side by side. And in fact, this presentation here is the same one I'm going to give Lake Cahola. The Association, but I did send it to Jason already. He's already seen this.
Well, I just want you to be understanding though, Ken, that you're dealing with a singular property and Doug is dealing with the entire state of Kansas. So it's a lot more difficult to do that than what you're doing, but maybe you guys can communicate a little bit and maybe there's an idea to be shared between you.
I'd be more than willing to do that. I work with the folks out of Lake Mead that have the same issue. Across those western states, they have the same problem and says, hey, Ken, you got it made. You can control your access. So,
All right.
thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, let's start into the department report. And thank you for your public comment. These are complicated issues and have lots of different ramifications. The agency state and fiscal status report, Robin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for a little bit of recap, I think that we reported to the commission at a previous meeting kind of where our budget submission was, in that we had presented the budget. Initially, we were asked to take 10% off of the Economic Development Initiative Funds money that we get. That goes to the parks and to the tourism divisions of our agency. The wildlife and fisheries side of the agency, because that's totally funded by hunters and anglers either through our licenses or PRDJ, it was not really affected. So when we did do our budget submission, we did have a 10% reduction. We took that 10% reduction totally out of parks and left tourism basically unharmed for the next fiscal year, which is the 2014 fiscal year. It's our belief that, or our hope, I should say, that the park passport that we implemented, which started in January of this year, that should increase revenues to the park side of the agency enough that they'll be able to withstand that 10% reduction that they got taken. That's about all that we know of the budget from the last meeting. However, I would say this: there have been a few things that are changing. The state's fiscal picture is a little bit better. Revenues are coming in a little bit better than what they anticipated. There is some belief that some of the revenues from December were a response to potential tax increases on the federal level, and so that may have been a one-time bump. But the fact of the matter is that it appears that the state's fiscal picture is a little bit better, and the hole that they need to work out of because of the tax reductions that they passed last year is not quite as bad as they thought. Probably more importantly, the governor is most likely going to propose something very similar to what he originally proposed last year, and that is that a revenue package that would be revenue neutral. And he's going to do that by suggesting that they go back to what he proposed last year as far as having some tax credits that they take away, leave the sales tax, which was designed to come off, the sales tax increase, which was passed several years ago and was designed to sunset. He requested last year, and the legislature did not agree with him, to continue that increased sales tax for a period of years. And so the governor's going to come back with that proposal, and he's going to do that in the vein that it would continue to finance further income tax reductions. And the short side of that story is should the legislature adopt that, the revenue hole that was projected will not happen, and it could significantly change what they are asking of the agencies as far as the budgets. We'll know that next week when the governor gives his state of the state. So at the next commission meeting, we'll have an ability to give you a little better picture as to what they are going to ultimately ask of our agency, which is predominantly, as I said, parks and tourism. And we'll have a few months of history with the park passport. They are already being sold, people that are buying new vehicles, people that are to register by February 15th. So we are selling park passports. It apparently is working fairly well. We've had some of them sold in some of the bigger counties, some of them sold in some of the smaller counties, and apparently that part of it's going pretty good if we just meet our projections. And as you remember, our projections were that we would sell 10% of the cars and light trucks would buy a park passport. And if that in fact happens, I think that we're going to be okay as far as revenue on the park side. It would also report that if you compare this year, the parks are, and we just started our 7th month, so we're halfway through the fiscal year. If you compare this year for the parks to last year, we're going into this time period, which, heretofore has been a time where you don't collect a lot of revenues. We're going into this period with about $400,000 or $500,000 more in reserve than what we had last year, and that's not counting some potential monies in the cabin fee fund if we needed to access that. As you remember, last year we had to get a supplemental. The legislature did not pass that until late in the session, so we were actually having to borrow some money from our road fund to cash flow the parks through. I think that that's going to be better this year, and we will most likely not have to do that. From the standpoint of the agency, as you all know, we did have a pretty significant year last year, and Chris is going to talk about our legislative agenda, but it's not going to be much this year. We made enough changes from the financial aspect of the agency that I think that it's important that we let those set and kind of see where we're headed. We think we've done something very significant with the parks. We'll know that by the middle of the year, whether that's actually come to fruition or not. As you know, we did change the way that we deal with 65 and over hunters and anglers. That should add some revenue. I would say that we are going to continue to look at ways to market our licenses. And I said ways to market, not ways to increase it. We're, at least I am very much of the opinion that we do not need to increase our license fees. We just need to do a little bit better job of marketing. The technology that is available to us today gives us an ability, I think, to make it easier for people to buy licenses. We're looking into a number of ways to do that. I think I've mentioned to the commission before, we're looking at an affinity card to make it easier for people to buy licenses. We've had several different vendors. We've visited with several different vendors on ways to use smartphones, which is something that will come. It will come. It's just a matter of when it comes and when it comes to Kansas. But I think for the next generation of hunters and anglers, it would be something.
Answered everything. All right, Christopher. 2013 legislature.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this is Monday will be the start of the 2013 legislature. It's the beginning of the 2-year cycle, so bills that are introduced this year, even if they don't make it out, would still be alive next year. As Robin said, our department's legislative package last year was very significant. We got the vast majority of it through. There was just one bill that dealt with vessel registration caps, which at some point will have to be dealt with. And I had proposed it last year, and that was the only bill last year that didn't make it through that the department had initiated. This year, our focus is on boating and on the wildlife side. And the number one item, if you recall, last year there was the constitutional amendment that passed in November. So our number one item would be to reduce vessel taxation. And we're proposing that it would become effective next year, January 14, and it would reduce over a 3-year period vessel taxes to 0. So that's the department's proposal. Right now, it's a 30% valuation rate, and we propose next year to be 20%, the year after that 10%, and then 0. And that would step that down so there would be time. It wouldn't just be all in one shot. There is a fiscal impact to the state budget based on those vessel taxes on school finance, and that's about $1.6 million, so that would kind of soften that blow if we did it over a 3-year period. Second item would be boating under the influence, and this came from the Law Enforcement Division. Under boating under the influence, there's a time limitation whereby which you can capture that blood alcohol content, and it's 2 years. For vehicles driving over the road, the legislature changed the law last year, and it's over a 3-year period, so the department's proposing to track that with boating, 3-hour period, I'm sorry, over a 3-hour period. Roger was looking perplexed, and I'm thinking about boat taxes. So it would be over a 3-hour period instead of a 2-hour period. And then just to track with what's already occurring over the road. And then boater education requirements also came out of the Law Enforcement Division suggestion that we would set a grandfather clause date. There's already a grandfather clause in there that says if you're born on or after January 1 of '89, but it has an exception that says if you're over 21, you don't have to have boater education. If you're born on or after '89, you have to have it unless you're 21. And so we're going to propose to strike the unless you're 21. Similar to hunter education or for harvester education, which has a grandfather clause in it. On the wildlife side, we have one bill, and it deals with disabled combat veterans. We have a deer permit program that has for qualified nonprofits for youth hunt of a lifetime for terminally ill children, that we set aside some permits and they can apply for those, organizations can apply for those. And we seem to have gotten, based upon Afghanistan and Iraq, a number of requests for a similar program for disabled veterans, disabled combat veterans. So the department's going to propose that we'd set aside 10 permits for that as well. And with that, there are some items out there that I think are floating out there that are potential, have the potential to come up. The first one would be captive cervids, right? So we've discussed that in the commission before. The department once regulated captive cervids. In 1993, that was transferred to the Animal Health Department. The Animal Health Department has had some conversations with us, and really, I think what it boils down to is lack of manpower on their behalf to be able to enforce captive deer laws. And they would like to cooperate with us. They would still take the lead on the program, but they would like to cooperate with us in the enforcement of the program. Obviously, we do have a concern with wild deer herds and potential transmission of disease, so the department will be supporting that initiative of the Department of Agriculture. I think there's going to be a constitutional amendment proposed on the right to hunt, fish, and trap. I've done some research on that issue, and nationally, the department belongs to an association. The legal committee of that association actually opposed the constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap back in the early 2000s, late 90s, and so I think there have been some revisions to model language. I know that there's been a proposal submitted to me, and I sent my response back, so I think there'll probably be one and it'll be placed on the ballot in November of 2014 if it passes. And then there's been some discussion lately as to revisions to the Threatened and Endangered Species Act of the state of Kansas. And with that, I would stand for questions.
What does the constitutional right to fish and hunt and trap look like? What would that?
Well, generally, just generally what they say is, in the versions that I've seen, I think there are about 16 states that have it. Vermont's had one since the 1700s, so they've been around for a while. But basically it says the people shall have the right to hunt, fish, and trap, and then the one that I've seen recently, subject to laws, rules, and regulations, and use of traditional methods, that type of thing. So the language is, it's broad. It's not specific.
The affirmation that that's a basic right in Kansas and makes it harder for the potential of anti-hunting to come in the future and
There are some,
infringe and restrict.
hunting is a statutory privilege, in Kansas right now. So, the legislature has passed statutes which allow people to hunt, which allow us to set regulations. So it's definitely a change. Without getting into too much legalese, there's a standard by which you have to pass regulations currently, which is there a rational basis? I don't know if there's a constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap that passes, whether that would change that standard, and it would become a strict scrutiny analysis is how is the legal terminology, and basically whether it's the least restrictive method available. So when you look at inherent constitutional rights, it doesn't mean they can't be infringed upon. It just means that there has to be, the analysis is that it's the least restrictive method available when you are infringing on somebody's constitutional right.
Who's bringing this forth?
It's specifically in this instance, it's the NRA, but it's a national movement, that's what I'm telling you. And up until about 2000, there were 2 or so. Last year, there were 4 on the ballot that passed nationally in different states. So, it's just a wave that's coming, depends on how you write it, and it depends on how your court system interprets it, whether it's going to be the strict scrutiny analysis or not. And I can't give you a good answer on that because there is very little litigation on it on a national basis because it's so new, relatively speaking.
What's the department's position on it? In favor or not?
I think, if it's written, I suggested some revisions, and if the revisions are taken, I think we could support it.
Phelps from Manhattan. Chris, I know in the past when this came up, one of the major concerns was now we have with the Interstate Wildlife Violators Compact, and the courts can restrict future hunting privileges for violators, and there was concern was in the past, I know that if this was made a constitutional right, then it would compromise the state's ability to restrict this. This is something that's been addressed in the,
I don't think that that's a possibility, Doug, that we wouldn't be able to restrict somebody's hunting privileges because all of a sudden it's now a right to hunt. Again, rights can be restricted and infringed. We have the right to walk around freely as citizens of this country, but if you commit a crime, you can still be thrown in prison. So that's my analysis, is that you have the right, if you have the right to hunt, you can still have your right restricted.
have the right to commit a crime and get away with it.
Right.
Okay.
Questions for Chris. Ron?
Ask you from Manhattan. Chris, you mentioned that they're floating the idea of changing the Threatened and Endangered Species Act in Kansas. Could you tell us a little more where that's coming from and what is the reason for it?
Well, I've heard it from several places, and I think it deals with actually the permits and the mitigation and, some sort of, and primarily I think I'm hearing it in two areas. First would be metropolitan areas as they continue to expand and they're moving into critical habitat for a T or an E species, and then there's some sort of nexus that brings in our department, whether it would be a KDHE permit or a Department of Agriculture permit, and then we comment on it. That's the only time we're involved in the T&E process, and so then we require some sort of mitigation, and some people think that the mitigation is excessive. So I'm hearing it there, and in particular, I don't know if you saw this last year in Johnson County. It was the front page of the paper in the Kansas City Star several days in a row on that issue of red-bellied snake habitat. And then the other place that I'm hearing it is out west in relation to, in the southwest, in relation to some of these, like a lagoon or a retention pond where DWR has issued the permit, and then of course we're commenting on that permit, and there are some requirements associated with mitigation. It's the mitigation issue primarily, is what I've heard.
Is there substantial evidence that this mitigation has been so ominous that it's a real problem, or it's just that somebody didn't want to slow down?
Well, no, I think that with any issue there are two sides, and there's somewhere in the middle that somebody can discuss. Keith was much more involved in the Johnson County issue, and that was actually more of a governmental issue, Johnson County Commission. So, there's no good answer to your question. I appreciate what you're saying, but what one person feels is ominous, the other person might not feel is quite so difficult.
But I think we would really need to have much more detail to argue this in the legislature to find out, how bad it has been on the people who want to destroy habitat for threatened and endangered species, or if it's worked out and with some adaptations of their project and mitigation, it's a win-win situation.
As you know, mitigation is our last choice.
Right.
So,
but if you don't have mitigation,
obviously people.
If you don't have any provisions for mitigation, well then it's just bring on the bulldozers, and forget about threatened and endangered species. But the greater concern, I think, is if that goes into the legislative arena, there is, one might argue, a great risk that the whole program, the whole Threatened and Endangered Species Act in Kansas will be eviscerated.
Well, if you recall, about 6 years ago, there was an attempt to do that. It had a hearing, the bill didn't go anywhere. So, that's always a potential, and the rule is never forget the politics of wildlife management. I can appreciate what you're saying, that, it should be well discussed and that people should have all the facts, but that's largely not the case when we've dealt with the certain issues in the legislature in the past.
And I would hope that this department and the commission would be proactively involved in this before it gets to the situation in the legislature where it becomes it's too late, to influence things, and also with the governor. Thank you.
We've been asked to take a position and probably shouldn't take a position for a while, should we?
We don't actually take position on bills unless they're ours, of course, until after they've been scheduled for a hearing. The legislative process is a long process, and it's been my contention that just because somebody says they're going to rattle the saber and going to do something, it's that getting the bills introduced is one thing, getting it to a hearing is another, and there's no point in spending your powder until you know that you need to.
And Ron has a good point, but I mean that, but it's just, I think we need to be careful and see if it starts to gain traction, then we might see if it begins to affect us. Save our political capital as much as we can. Does anybody else have any comments? Yes?
Tim Don, just with the Quality Deer Management Association. I brought up this one issue last year. One of them, of course, was brought up tonight, and that's the road hunting problems we're having here in Kansas. Most of us deal with it as far as I'm aware of. It's a plague, for the most part, across the state of Kansas as hunters are dealing with. Is there any intentions at all of administration to try to come up with something to help us out there in the field with law enforcement to be able to tackle some of these guys that are doing this on a daily basis?
Sure. Obviously, we discussed last year extensively about new ways to combat poaching. There was a significant bill that moved through the legislature. In particular, the issue that was raised earlier was on coyote hunting. The department does have authority regulatorily to take some action related to coyotes, coyote hunting during the rifle deer season. That was the specific suggestion tonight. The department could propose closing that by regulatory action of the commission. There are some other things that are being discussed, and I don't want to get ahead of the game, but we've discussed internally some of these items, and I think they're going to show up on the next commission agenda for discussion, just as a general discussion. But we weren't quite ready to put that on today's agenda.
Okay, because that's what we're, we talked about possible gun case law last year. I just brought up the idea of it because a lot of the states are doing it. I know one particular state I used to hunt, West Virginia, they used to check us repeatedly when we were out hunting to check to see if guns were in the cases, one due to safety, and the other was, if they're out of the cases, at that point we feel like you're illegally road hunting at that point. So I just wanted to make sure that we are trying to look forward to this problem that we're having, because I realize, money's a big part of running wildlife in parks, but at the same point, I don't want us to forget about some of the major problems we're having in the field when us hunters are out there having bad hunting experiences. So we want to make sure that we take care of the guys in the field out there that are hunting at the same point. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Any other questions for Chris? Yes.
Chris, on the vessel registration tax, we're at 30, and like middle of the road would be 20, then a big reduction would be 10. Do you see the chance of that ever going to zero?
That is what our proposal is, Robert.
That's our proposal?
Our proposal is to take it to zero over a 3-year period.
Okay.
We're at 30, next year would be 20% valuation, 10% in 2015, and zero valuation or exempt in 2016.
Okay. Then the legislature's going to have to take this up and vote on this?
That's correct.
And it probably won't be zero?
Well, I don't know I can't predict the future, but generally speaking, our proposal is I'm sure there will be counter proposals.
Okay. What would replace that revenue that these counties would be losing by collecting this tax?
Right. I mean, I think it's fair to say that when you look at the valuation and you take away from a pot, you either cut or you shift it to something else or you raise. So that's a choice that people would have to make at that point. Now, if you look at the dollar values on a statewide basis or on a county and you break it down to a county basis, what we're talking about is about $130 a boat, roughly, from what the figures I could get when you average that out. On a county basis, you're going to have to look at what percentage of the overall budget that really makes a difference on. So, I think your point's well taken. Everybody's going to have to make a decision where they want it to be. If you exempt it, then you're shifting someplace else, or you're cutting if you don't want to raise. If you lower it down and more people come back, there's the argument that you're actually going to meet or exceed where you're at now.
Also, did you look at the possibility of maybe having something based on the length of the vessel? That's something you looked at that other states have?
Well, typically where I've seen that is registration fees, and we used to have that for our registration fees, not based on the length of the vessel for taxation purposes, because heretofore, everybody was taxed the same at 30% valuation no matter what your vessel is. So that's a potential option. In my discussions with the Department of Revenue, they would prefer to keep it as simple as possible from their accounting standpoint. And I'm sure that the county appraisers would like to keep it as simple as possible. But that, our proposal is what I discussed today, and if counter proposals come up, we'll be sure to entertain them.
Thank you.
Chris, you said that there was $1.6, $1.8 million worth of revenue currently. Is that right?
1.6 that goes to state finance, or school finance, on a statewide basis.
Okay.
So that's why it's about $10 million of tax generated on a statewide basis annually.
Okay.
30% value, this is how it works. So there's
$1.8 million just to education.
What's that?
$1.8 million of the $10 million is just to education.
Just to education, which is why we are proposing to step it down over a 3-year period.
And there's a gross revenue stream of 10 million that comes in now roughly, and that goes to all?
That's to all counties
Everything.
spread out across. That's when you tally up 105 counties.
Yeah. I don't know, as a former county commissioner, I think you'll have 105 counties maybe not be in agreement with that. I know that's what you're saying. I'm just, how can the revenue be offset?
Well, I mean, so we'll play cards here. So if you do not take it to zero, and people who were unlawfully registering out of state, but you're competitive with those surrounding states, decide that they want to follow the law and move their boats back to Kansas, and then individuals who are not purchasing vessels because of the high taxation value decide that they can upgrade, there's the potential that you could offset by lowering, you could offset some of that loss.
So the guy that goes to Oklahoma and does it now, if he does decide to come back, what modality is in place to capture additional revenue then?
Well, we weren't getting anything from him before.
I'm not
correct?
sure we get any new revenue when he comes back, but as he trades boats in, he'll buy it in the state of Kansas and pay state sales tax.
Well, he does do that, but then the same individual, when they come back to our state and register in our state, then the revenue that was zero for that boat now becomes whatever it is based on the taxation level.
Do we have any type of quantification on how big of a universe this is? I mean, are there tens of thousands of vessels that potentially could?
There's 10,000.
Are you making that number up?
No, and I can't tell you for sure because Missouri won't give me the information. So I can tell you what Oklahoma told me, which is they have almost 5,000 boats that are registered, and they send the tax bill to Kansas addresses.
Okay.
So it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So there is a real potential of a new revenue stream.
I wouldn't necessarily say a new revenue stream, but some sort of an offset, yes. I mean, it's speculation. I mean, we're trying to give you our best guess.
I hope you don't have a...
Chris, does the department have any projections on increase in revenue from registration, increased registrations and increased federal matching funds, if this works out the way?
Okay. So the department gets federal funding from the Coast Guard based upon the number of registrations we have. It's a 50-50 match program. So if you are getting so much money and then you're not generating your 50% match, ultimately you end up in reversion. Why did I bring this up? You have to increase either your registration fee or the number of registrations, essentially, to meet that. I don't have a projection on where that breaks out. You know, at some point in the future, we're going to have either increased registration fees or
Well, I was thinking,
increased registrations.
we're trying to get these illegally registered boats legally registered in Kansas, and you talk about 5,000 in Oklahoma. Do you think, 50% rate, or is it just a shot in the dark?
I don't know. I don't know what the break point is to encourage people to do what's legal in that regard. At some point, when you reduce that tax level,
We'll know in a few years.
then it'd be, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Questions for Chris?
Not to belabor it any, unless you think that we're idiots. I would like to point out that, what Chris has said, I mean, if we just reduce it, we likely could make more tax revenue for some of the counties. But even if we get rid of that tax, it's not a zero-sum game. There's a lot of things that will happen in the Kansas economy because it is more affordable for people to have boats. We're going to sell more boats. We're going to have more boats on our lakes. It is going to do something that you can't quantify right now as far as what it is, but I think that everybody will recognize that even though we're not collecting that property tax revenue, it is going to be doing something positive to the Kansas economy if you do not have tax. And if you want to take it one step further and look at it from a philosophical nature, and I know that Kansas has left the philosophical argument of property taxes a long time ago, but what services is the local government doing for boats? They're really not. When you look at cars and when you look at your house, you're getting fire protection, you're getting water, you're getting the infrastructure for that community. But when you look at what is that boat occupying as far as local infrastructure, and it's really not. So there's a philosophical argument, and then there's an argument as to how it would filter through the Kansas economy, and that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm quite confident that Randy, you make the point. The county commissioners are going to come in and say we're losing money, but that's going to be a county by county situation. I mean, there are some counties. Chris talked about Jefferson County to me today and what they collect. But the fact of the matter is there are positive things that will happen if we had a zero tax on boats.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Let's move to the commissioner permit update and drawing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's that time of year when we decide who's going to receive commissioner permits for 2013, big game seasons. Just as a reminder, and we do have some new commissioners, I think, since last year when we made this drawing, so this will be new to them. But state statute does allow the department, authorizes the department to issue up to 7 commission big game permits per calendar year. And we're limited to 1 elk, 1 antelope, and up to 7 any deer. We're limited to 7 permits, 1 of which can be an elk, 1 of which can be an antelope, and the remainder can be deer. So we have in the past, the elk is always one that goes, and then we have opted not to issue the antelope permit depending upon the choice of the successful organization that's drawn. The other thing is that this program is open to any organizations that have as a part of their mission the furtherance of fish and wildlife management and encouragement of hunting and fishing opportunities in the state. And so those are essentially 501c3 nonprofit organizations that have the best interests of fish and wildlife in their mission statements. Also, organizations can only receive this once in every 3 years. So those that are successful 1 year have to essentially wait for 3 years to re-enter the drawing. So just a little background. We've essentially, over the 7 years, 2006 was the first year that we had this program, and over those 7 years we've collected $265,700 from the sale of those permits. We've had a total of 714 applications in those 7 years, and they've ranged from about 59 to 119 applicants each year, so averaging about 100 applicants. This year we have 86 applicants in the drawing for those 7 permits. The way the money, essentially when a successful organization actually pays for the permit, the face value of the permit to the department, once they sell that permit, then they can subtract the amount of the permit that they brought forward when they obtained their voucher. And then the remaining proceeds, 85% of that is returned to the department, with the organization retaining 15% for their organization to do with what they choose. The 85% that we collect, they send the money back to us. Then we work with the organization in terms of what kind of a program they want to put that money towards. So it's essentially a way in which we can account for the money by them sending it to us, and then we send it back to them for a program, but at least we have kind of a revenue stream that we can kind of show how we transported that funds back and forth. Projects, of course, obviously a fair number of habitat programs that have been implemented with these funds over the years. And then the other big one, of course, is youth education programs, and those organizations using that for shooting sports opportunities, archery in the schools, that kind of thing. So at any rate, that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of what the program is all about. Sheila, God bless her, runs the program, makes sure that the folks that the messages go out each year, and that folks are informed that it's time to make application. She brings those applications in, she reviews them in terms of their compliance and eligibility to be in the drawing, and then she puts the proper number of balls in the container to represent the 83 or 86 applicants that we have this year. And the process then at this point would be that each commissioner will draw out a ball and with a number on it, and she has the record to indicate which organization has that number, and then we'll find out who the successful folks are for next year.
Is the Friends of NRA Douglas County. Number 20 is National Wild Turkey Federation in the Northeast Kansas chapter. Number 15th is the National Wild Turkey Federation Beloit chapter.
Number 60.
Attorney Thomason has a question here. Sheila, as you're announcing the organizations, we should announce also their choice, so the...
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be good. So we'll go back to number 83, which was Commissioner Wilson, and that was Friends of NRA, Douglas County, that's a deer. All right, and Mr. Marshall had number 20. That was Northwest, or National Wild Turkey Federation, Northeast Kansas, and that is an elk, so the elk is now gone. All right. Mr. Dill had Beloit National Wild Turkey Federation. They also had elk, but they will get their second choice, which is deer. Okay, Commissioner Lauber had number 60, which is the Quail and Upland Wildlife Federation, Jayhawk chapter. They had elk as their first choice, which is gone. They will get an antelope, which is the next choice.
Who got that?
35.
Number 35 is the Kansas Alliance for Wetlands and Streams State Chapter. They had elk as their first choice, which is gone. Their second choice is deer, so they will be awarded a deer.
33.
33 is National Wild Turkey Federation Chisholm Trail, and their first choice with elk, they will receive a deer.
These are just
66.
66 is the Crawford County 4-H Shooting Sports, and they, first choice was an elk, which is gone. They will also receive a deer. And I have the applications with, if anybody wants to see them. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's always a nice distribution that we have most of the time for successful applicants for these permits. So they go very well. They're very successful. And now the other point I might make, if you don't know, is that these are very choice permits, particularly in the case of the deer, which is can be resident, non-resident, good anywhere in the state for either species during any season with legal equipment. So they are absolutely a choice permit for deer hunting in the state of Kansas. So at any rate, thank you very much.
How do they go about selling these when they...
Well, the selling of the permits kind of varies. Some of them have put them out on eBay. Some of them actually have sort of standing order, a standing bid. Some of them take them to their national conventions and make them available there in an auction situation. It just kind of varies with each organization on how we encourage them to look at all avenues. Of course, our interest is in getting as much from the permits as possible. And I think in most cases, the people who have been successful in these have been quite successful in raising a fair amount of money.
What does the elk typically bring?
Elk has been running in the $9,000 range. 9,500 has been as much as 14,000. 23,000. I guess that was when the Elk Foundation won that. They did it at their national chapter. And then the deer runs an average of 5,000 to 5,500 range.
So good numbers.
Yeah. And I think Mule Deer Foundation had the deer permit a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I think they sold for 14,000, I believe.
So, yeah. So anyway, very good program, and thanks to the commission for helping us out on that.
Michael?
Yeah, in some states, the money raised goes to conservation for that particular species. Like if somebody pays $400,000 for the Montana bighorn sheep permit, which happens, that money goes toward, most of it goes towards bighorn sheep conservation. Is there anything like that here, or it just has to be an approved program?
It's just an approved project, Mike, that either deals with fish wildlife habitat and or hunting, fishing opportunity.
Okay, another question I have is, if somebody wants to find out how to contact these organizations, can you provide that information?
I believe Sheila does do that.
We try to put it on the website. I'll provide it to Information Services, and we'll try to put it there. And anybody calls me, I provide it to them, too.
Okay, I can send them your way then.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Gabe. Brad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. We are beginning a general discussion of a couple of public lands regulations that we want to bring back and clean up, and we also want to clean up our reference document. What's in the reference document, or the briefing book, is only our changes to that reference document, and these are special regulations that are in effect on specific wildlife areas and state fishing lakes. And that complete reference document is adopted into Regulation 115.8-1. And I don't need to go through all those changes unless you want me to, but there's a couple that I want to bring to your attention. And one is what we talked about last year, and that is bringing non-toxic shot to our designated dove field areas. And those will be specific to those dove fields on individual wildlife areas. The other one is no motorized boats on Elk City Wildlife Area. Had a little typo in there. I should have added, instead of removing Widgeon and Simmons marshes, we just needed to add house mount marsh. We're not going to add developed wetlands. That's basically it in a nutshell on the reference document, unless you have specific questions, and we'll talk about the other two cleanup.
Brad, what was that last little thing you mentioned?
No motorized boats.
Right.
Region 5.
Right.
Elk City Wildlife Area.
Right.
I had in there remove Widgeon and Simmons marshes and add just developed wetlands. We're just going to keep Widgeon, Simmons, and add house mount marsh.
What, say that last one, Houseman?
House mount.
Okay. I have no idea where that's at.
It's a new one that's being constructed.
I want to make sure I'm...
Okay, does anybody have any questions or anything for Brad? Any questions from the public?
The next one, we just did the beating regulation last year, 115-823, and it's been brought to our attention that we may have inadvertently passed a definition that may affect our managed dove fields, where we say cannot manipulate or scatter grains. Under federal regulations, we are allowed to do that, but in this definition that we created, we may have inadvertently passed a definition that may prohibit us from doing that or putting a hunter in a situation where he could be violating that regulation. So we're going to come back with a definition next commission meeting that will clean up that and allow us to manipulate our dove fields so we don't put a hunter in jeopardy. Same can be said for 18-82, blinds, tree stands, and decoys. This regulation only refers to tree stands. It doesn't say anything about other types of stands, which brought to questions what is a blind and what's a tree stand. The question came up, what about tripod stands, and how does this regulation affect that? And again, we'll come back with a cleaner definition on blinds and tree stands. Probably remove tree stands and refer to them as hunting stands or something similar.
Anybody have any questions for Brad on that?
I have one, Mr. Chairman. On that 115-823 on the definition of baiting, are we doing that by brush hogging those sunflower fields, or how?
Yes, we do. We scatter, once the seed matures, we scatter that sunflower head to put the grain on the ground.
That's why it falls underneath that definition?
Yes.
We're still going to continue to do that, but we're going to change some of this?
Yes, we plan to do that. We're just going to change the definition that won't make a hunter in violation of that regulation.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Brad? All right, thank you. I think now would be a decent time to take about a 10-minute break. I'll keep my eye on the clock.